Hello and welcome to another Awaken with Shadow Work podcast. I'm joined today by Cailee Anello from Oregon in America. How are you doing, Cailee?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very excited to be talking to you this evening. We're going to be talking about your shadow work journey, ancestral trauma and family patterns, human design charts, which is a combination of astrology, Cabala, I-Ching and the chakra system. Which then led you on to homeopathy.
Yeah.
And then if we have time, we're going to be discussing the very small matter of destiny versus proactive life choices.
Sounds good to me.
It does, yeah. So, right, so do you want to tell us about your shadow work journey?
Oh, sure. So essentially, to give a little bit of background on my life, to kind of skim over the picture a little bit. So I grew up with a mom who was pretty severely mentally ill, was kind of in and out of psychiatrist chairs and just had a lot of issues. So I kind of grew up in the role of caretaker for my parents and for my siblings. And so what that meant is that I really didn't have an identity of my own when I was growing up. I kind of had to be who I needed to be for my family, especially just for my own safety. It made things easier to just be what they needed. And so once I moved out of the house, when I was 18 and went to college, that became very apparent to me that I didn't have my own identity and I didn't know who I was. And it was really uncomfortable to realize that about myself. And luckily, I had always had a big interest in psychology, partially just from trying to figure out my own family. And so I ended up majoring in psychology in college and getting into a little bit of Carl Jung and that kind of thing then, but we really only scratched the surface on, unfortunately, on Jung and Freud and everything like that. It was a lot of behaviorist, humans are just animals and we can be trained to do certain things. So it was quite the experience. But then I ended up getting an injury. It was just like I had not like thrown out my hip, but I had just injured my hip exercising. And so I ended up going to see a chiropractor. And unfortunately, I had tensed up when he went to adjust my neck. And so when he did the neck adjustment, it basically sent me to the ER. It was really, really bad. And that was kind of like, in a sense, my awakening, which is such a strange thing to say. But if I hadn't gotten that severe injury, I wouldn't have found the next chiropractor who was able to do some sort of muscle release to the point where I was totally fine after one session.
Wow.
So I became very intrigued by this man because when I was in the hospital, they literally had no idea what to do with me. They were just like, we don't know, there's something wrong with you, but we have no idea what it is.
Wow.
And yeah, I'd always had muscle tension growing up. And I know now that it was because I was mad at my family situation and, studying the works of Reich and Lowen. Now I understand that was armoring and all of that. But essentially, if I hadn't had that terrible incident, I wouldn't have met the practitioner who really introduced me to a lot of things that would shape me later in life. And so he was the one who introduced me not only to the world of natural health and how to actually take care of myself and look after myself, but he introduced me to Michael Desarian's work and astrology and tarot, and his wife did as well. She was very into tarot and was essentially my therapist at the time. And so it was just such a different way of viewing the body and such a different way of living life. They were a really good example for me. And I'm so grateful that I had that kind of like divine intervention, so to speak, because it just totally set me on a new path. And I was lucky that I had always had that internal drive to better myself. Even when I was younger, I was always searching for answers in the wrong places at the time, but I was young, so I didn't know where the right places were. But so I had that drive in me, and that really just made me realize, okay, so it's great to nourish yourself with the right foods and with herbs, but I didn't really see a lot of resolution in my symptoms until I started to go inward. And that's kind of when my journey really, really started at like 20 years old.
Wow. Now, you know, I'm always so impressed when I hear about younger people who have started their shadow work already, or at least who have got into this kind of information. Because, I mean, usually what I found since I started the group is that most people, they come to shadow work later on in life. They usually have like a midlife crisis. And so it's really encouraging to know that there are some younger people as well who know about this stuff and who are getting to know about how to look after themselves and finding tools to do that. So hats off to you. I wish that I was in your position, you know, when I was your age. So good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I just had a lot of motivation, I guess, to live differently. And it's not to bash my family or anything like that. You know, we can get into it later, but I think that I chose my family in a way, and I'm very grateful for, I guess you could say, their negative influence, because it's what really led me to live my life differently, especially because my older brother got into some pretty severe drug addictions and ended up passing away when I was 14. So since then, that's really when I started to notice like a lot of physical ailments. And it was interesting because it definitely had a correspondence with what my brother was going through, because it was as if like my nervous system was just done, and it couldn't handle anything else. I actually started having fainting episodes, which was very strange. I would faint pretty much for no reason. And it was just like a push, like that uncomfortable feeling I had within, not only psychologically, because I didn't like know who I was, but it manifested so physically that it drove me to find answers.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, so the body never lies, does it? I mean, I always say when people get sick, there's always a reason. There's always a psychological reason behind most illnesses. And something like fainting is just like you just want to zone out. You just want to it's almost like a mini death or something, isn't it? It's like I just want to go now.
Yeah, and that started becoming my experience of having these mini deaths, where I had many times where I thought that I was dying, even though I wasn't dying. So the fainting episodes, even like fainting in class sitting up, was very bizarre. And then I started getting paranoid about that, and I started having panic attacks, which is something that my mom had struggled with growing up. And I'm like, oh, great. So here comes the genetics, you know, I'm just predetermined to have these physical ailments and I'm screwed. And, you know, of course I found that wasn't the case, but at the time that's what I thought. And I was like, oh my God, my greatest fears are coming to fruition. I'm going to become my mom. So it was bad, but it's like in those times when you're panicking, you really feel like you're dying. And so it with my brother dying so suddenly, of course, it was due to drugs. It wasn't for no reason.
Yeah.
But in my mind, when I had turned 21, the age that he had died, all of a sudden I thought I was going to die too. And it's this weird like memory that I had, and just like this weird thing that kicked in, and I didn't see the pattern until actually like I picked up on this pattern only a few months ago, when I really realized, oh my God, it was 21. I had like the 21st birthday from hell, where I was in a car with drunk drivers and they were fighting, and it was like I thought I was gonna die that night. And then it just like little episodes like that really shook me and made me wake up and really start to try to heal these family patterns and to be better, and in that it wasn't just going to be solved by diet and nutrition.
Yeah.
It wasn't. My tests would literally keep coming back the same over and over, even though I was doing everything right. It didn't matter.
So, I mean, you really just took control over the situation, really, didn't you? You said no more. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen this way for me. Because I think that there is definitely something in ancestral trauma, and I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in my own family, where the men on one side have had addictions that later on, you know, other parts of my family have had exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in my own life as well, and it does happen like that until we say no more, and we make the effort to actually do something. But like I've always said, you have to have the will to do it, and you've obviously have the will.
Yeah, it's something that I couldn't have imagined doing anything else but trying, because I saw the path that I would go down. Because it's like, when you're in a family like that, it's not a conscious thing, but I felt this like unconscious pull to like be down to that level, and that I was going to get sucked into that if I didn't claw my way out, essentially, and really figure out what was going on with these patterns. And so I'm grateful to it. And so I have to say that it was an interesting thing, though, because it wasn't until I started taking care of myself physically, even though that didn't solve my physical ailments, it helped clear my mind to new possibilities and to things that I was never open to before. So that's why I went into nutrition ultimately with psychology, is because I've just seen that if you can't think straight because you're not nourishing yourself and you're putting chemicals in your body time and again, it's just this weird thing where it's like, this is what happened for me, and I've seen it happen to other people. You start to take care of yourself, and it's like the lights turn on again.
Okay.
And you're like, oh shit, like I'm living a lie and I need to figure this out. It's like, it's a weird catalyst for bigger things.
Okay. So when did you get into human design? And can I ask you also, is human, I've never heard of human design before. Is it something that's well known, or is it something that you've made up? I don't know. Is it your own is it your own version of applying lots of different techniques? Is that what it is?
No, it's not my own. So essentially, I'll tell you a little bit about, like, I got into astrology because of that practitioner, because he was very interested in medical astrology. And so I started with that. And then I taught myself how to read tarot. I've been doing that for 6 years. And so it was just kind of a natural progression where I was just looking into different systems, and I, learned more about astrology. And then through that rabbit hole, I found human design, which essentially, as you mentioned earlier, combines ancient systems into one energetic blueprint, they call it. So it's like, I wish I had a picture of the chart, but it'll look like the outline of a human. And then there will be centers going down, like the chakras. And then you'll see lines coming out that connect the centers, and that's where the I-Ching comes in. And essentially within those gates is either a gift, like an energetic gift that you have, or it contains the shadow if it's the lower expression of that. Okay. So it just really fascinated me, because for whatever reason, it just connected to me. And it was something, because I hadn't heard a lot about it, I was really skeptical of it at first, naturally, just because I had been like a bit wary of the new age already, looking into astrology and tarot. I just knew deep down there was something that didn't fully resonate with a lot of it, but I knew that there was something to it that was really valuable. So I started digging and learning about it and reading a bunch of books on it. And there's still so much to learn, because there's so much to this system. But essentially, people just kept asking me about it, and they just kept showing interest, and people started asking me to do readings for them. So I started doing them for free for friends, and then charging like a very, very tiny amount for other people eventually. And it just kept growing. And it was a weird experience, because it's not something that I ever saw myself doing. But when I would read for people, they would be coming to me a lot of times around their Saturn return, which is around age 30. It's kind of like late 20s to mid 30s is that range that I get. And then I get people who are nearing their Chiron return, so around middle age, age 50. And so they would be coming to me and they'd be really lost and they'd feel really stuck. And there was something about their chart that would remind them of all the dreams that they used to have for themselves, of all the gifts that they had suppressed for so many years because they needed to make money. Or there's, for example, one of the centers is the identity center. And if you have some of the centers open, everybody does, essentially, you're more prone to take on conditioning from other people and from the world in the open centers. Whereas if they're colored in or defined, that's more consistently yours and you're less prone to conditioning there. So people would come to me with open identity centers and they would be just mortified because they would wake up one day and realize that they had just taken on the role of their parent. They had done the same career or had the same patterns, or they didn't have an identity, like I talked about earlier, of their own. People like that, they're more prone to enmeshment and to having really unhealthy bonds. There's many centers, like if you have an open head center, you're more prone to being influenced by the ideas of others, for better or worse.
Okay.
So there just ended up being so much value in these charts for people. And because I think what you said earlier about the body doesn't lie, a lot of people would be really burnt out and they would be coming to me and they weren't living the life that they thought they would. And so it's just like a gentle reminder to start living your life a bit differently, and a reminder of the capabilities and the potentials that may have been just buried under conditioning.
That's brilliant. God, I can't wait to get mine done. So will you talk me through a bit about the practice? Like when a client comes to you, what's your sort of first, second and third thing to do? How do you go through it with the client?
So we'll get into this later, but I'm very influenced by homeopathy in the way that I see clients. And what I mean by that is when you come to a homeopath, if you don't know what that is, it's essentially a form of energy medicine. And it follows natural law in that, say you have poison ivy, you can take a diluted form of poison ivy and the two will cancel each other out. So it's a like cures like is how it is. But essentially, you have to get very specific details about a person. You have to really capture some of these essence to know what remedy to give them, because there are thousands and thousands of remedies.
Okay.
So how I enter into a one-on-one with somebody for human design is I want their story first. I don't want to say a thing. I want to really get an essence of where they're at, why they're coming to me, what inspired them to book. So I'll really just open up the floor to them and let them talk for as long as they wish about why they felt inspired to get a reading. Just so I really get a sense of them. Sometimes I will pull like a tarot card too, if there's something specifically I should go over, a central theme that I should really be looking at in depth with them. And so that's the first thing that I do. And then essentially a lot of people who are coming to me, they just don't have a clue what human design is. So I just try to explain to them the energetics of their chart, how they may show up in the world to other people. I go through the centers, like I had mentioned, where they're more prone to taking on the world and conditioning from others, and then where they're a little bit more fixed in their chart. And so sometimes it takes several readings because there's so much to a chart, but I try to really give them the major themes that I see and to highlight just this is a way of looking at yourself differently. It's kind of like holding up a mirror to themselves and considering things that they may have, again, shoved aside because half of the human design chart is conscious and the other half is unconscious. So there's a lot of unconscious driving forces in a chart. And they all have a different energetic feel to them based on what gate it's in, or what lesson, or what planet that gate is in. So it's like there's layers and layers and layers to like the chart. But I always like to make it a really interactive process. And then I like to really give them tools on how to work with the energies and to connect to them, like with journaling exercises and things like that. Can
I ask you, when you tell people about what's in their shadow, do any people kind of, do they agree? Do they always agree, or do they sometimes disagree with what you say?
That's a really good question. I see both. And so a lot of the chart feels very familiar to a person. It's like you're reading their diary, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's more so with their energy type and with their centers. But then when you get into the gates and the planets, that's when it gets to be a little bit more like, I don't know if I'm that competitive or driven, or
Well,
I don't really.
that's where they become resistant then, perhaps to what they don't know about themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's an interesting thing because you feel kind of the energy shift a little bit once you get into the gates, because it becomes, you have to really, in everything in human design, there's a higher and a lower expression. And so once you get into the shadow aspects of something, like I was just reading about what is it? I have it written here. It's the gate of grace. So with the gate of grace, it's in the solar plexus, which is the emotional center. So people who have this gate, they're really, really good at being sociable. They have no problems with small talk and with, connecting to a lot of different types of people. And that's a great asset to have in this life, right? But then the shadow aspect of that is that they have a tendency to only connect on a surface level, to protect their feelings and to avoid getting hurt. So that's just one example of how I'd have to bring up, and it's like thinking of yourself in that way of wearing a mask in public, or this persona, it's not an easy thing to admit to yourself, especially if you're really new to this kind of thing, which a lot of people who come to me, they're very new. They've maybe dabbled in the new age, clearly, if they're interested in this, but they are not.
I think that a lot of the time when people come for readings, they want to hear the nice bits. They want to hear the nice things about themselves, especially. It's harder for people to admit to some things that they don't know about themselves, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's an interesting phenomenon though, because they come to me because they're stuck.
Yeah.
So it's like, if I just tell you you're such a great socializer, you're just a social butterfly, you light up the room, and I don't mention that, but people don't really know who you are because you always wear a mask. That's not helpful for me to not mention that aspect, because you're trying to grow, right? You're not going to really, I guess, realize the full potential of that gate if you don't know the shadow aspect. And there's a shadow aspect, like I said, to the centers, where you could take on others' identities, and like it's a lot, because it's like a lot of people just have to ask themselves, like, is this really authentic to me, or did I pick this up from other people and just assumed it as my own because that was easier at the time?
Right. Okay. And so at the moment you're studying homeopathy, is that right?
Yeah, I am. It's another thing that I've been using on myself for the past 6 years. And so now that I have my nutrition degree, I'm finally getting to study to become a practitioner. So I'm in a mentorship with a local homeopath. And it's just been the most incredible experience, because like I said, it's another layer, because the other thing I started noticing in readings is that maybe people knew some aspects of their shadow, and maybe people came to me, they've been to talk therapy, they've done all the things, but there's just something about themselves that keeps sabotaging, and that they just can't seem to move past. And so I'm a huge advocate for going into the self, and you have to do that in a way with homeopathy, but sometimes there just needs to be a little bit of help too. And so studying homeopathy and learning about human psychology through that way has been just the most rewarding thing, because in homeopathy, we say that we want to create a working mythology for why somebody is sick. So it's just like I was saying, it's attaching meaning to these physical ailments and seeing what's the deeper disturbance to what we call the vital force, which is just like the chi, the vital energy within. And the fascinating thing is that, we talk about archetypes in terms of psychology and Carl Jung. Well, in homeopathy, each remedy is its own archetype.
Wow.
Because within it, they represent a very distinctive type of person, of characteristics. So the remedy that I've been going into a lot for school lately is helium. And I can't tell you how much synchronicity I've had around helium. Once I started studying it, it's the most amazing thing, because, we do a lot of case studies where somebody who needs the remedy helium, it's like they literally start embodying the properties of helium. So helium, a helium balloon is floating up and away from the earth. Somebody who needs helium, I think you'll find this interesting, because, in your group, we love talking about the new age. It fits a lot of new age types, because the specific case study that I had was a woman who went to ashram every day, and she would sit and meditate for hours and hours and hours. And really, she didn't want to be connected to earth. And so she was like a helium balloon floating away into the ether to connect to universal energy, or what have you, Kundalini rising, instead of being grounded. And the most interesting thing is that you knew the remedy from how she spoke. So one of the things, we always look at dreams and we always look at phobias to match a remedy. She was afraid of soil. She didn't want to dig her hands into the earth, because she did not want to be grounded. And she would have dreams where she would fall from a building, but she would never land. She never got to that part in her dream where she actually hit the ground. It was as if she was hovering off the ground. So, okay, that starts giving us clues. It's like these people, they're very aloof. They don't want connection with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then she literally said that she felt as if her husband had pricked her with a pin and deflated her.
Wow.
So it's like literally in the language is the remedy. And I've had other people who say, my head feels like it's blown up like a helium balloon. Other things like that, it's the most interesting thing, and it's an archetype.
Wow.
So once you give this remedy, so to continue a different case study, because I don't know, this woman had just gotten her remedy. So another case study of helium is, all of a sudden she went from wanting to climb mountains and be up above and like hike up to altitude. All of a sudden, after the remedy, she was like, I really want to be at sea level. I want to connect to the earth. I want to start gardening. I want to start, she connected back to her husband, who they had just been completely drifting apart, And so it's interesting. So it helps a person to correct the vital force within, so that it's balanced and so that they can do internal work.
That's amazing. I love to. I can't believe that the body tells you so much, and the dreams are obviously telling you so much as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
Sorry, Cailee. Listen, I'm just going to stop it for now, and I'm going to do the second part afterwards. So I'll join you in a minute. Okay. Thanks.